Hi, this is Manisha Kadagatur for Tell It Like It Is. My guest today is Rajendra Kalur, an ex-banker and entrepreneur. With over 25 years of experience, Raj has straddled the multinational route as well as co-founded two very successful wealth management firms. Currently, he's on the board of the CFA Society and heads research and advocacy committee at the CFA Society. He has a CFA and an MBA from the Cranfield School in the UK. He's also a long distance runner, trekker, and cyclist. Welcome, Raj.
Yeah, thanks, Manisha. You've been amazing in your introduction. Couldn't have done better. Yeah.
Now I've got a great panelist. So Raj and I go back a long time, and I've always admired how he's gone about his life. So maybe Raj, you want to start over there, right at the beginning? Tell me all about your story. Where did you start from? And yeah, it's been a long journey.
Yeah, I'm old, as you can see, with graying hairs, and hopefully not much of it has translated into wisdom. But yeah, I mean, the follies of the past, we go on correcting into the future, and that's where I am today. So, but to answer Manisha's question, yeah, I mean, I started fairly early, if you look at it, and if I really recollect my career days. Immediately after my graduation is when I joined jobs, and that's because my father retired early, and my two younger brothers were still studying, and there's somebody who need to keep the house fires warm. So that's how it started. I started with a public sector insurance company, and in those days, the early 90s, in fact, even prior to the big bang reforms of Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, and in an industry which was very highly unionized. So it was an exciting experience. Me at around a little over 20 years, working in a highly unionized financial services company, and inspired by the writings of Ayn Rand and others in the Western world, really, the unionized environment was felt a little strange. And the first day in my office, I was virtually get out by the union for almost trying to implement or suggesting things which the unions didn't agree. So that was the strength. It was a pretty, fiery beginning for me, and it was a great learning as well. And from there on, I think I realized that one can't be impulsive and impetuous and bring change all at once. So change is a gradual, process, and you need to take all sides along when you implement changes. So I think that really that set up real learning there, and the fact that you could turn around a highly unionized environment and into a highly productive, office. Uh, I think I would say is one of my memorable stints. This was a very brief stint in the insurance company because soon, and by then, of course, the Big Bang reforms had come in, and SEBI, the capital markets regulator, was already in place. There were a great deal of changes that were happening in the capital markets. Asset management companies were being set up, foreign tie-ups were happening, and even within the insurance space, general insurance company tied up with the George Soros led quantum fund management to set up an asset management company. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the first employees of that company as well, and setting up business in the eastern part of the country. So
So
that's
wait, so tell me about that.
yeah.
So tell me about that. Now, I found this extremely interesting that day one of your career, you go in with all these ideas that you want to make change, and then you're get out by a union. That must have been something, right? And then you from there you say, uh, I'm going to really embrace change, that's just amazing. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, see, I mean, when you look at the office there, it was an old office. The average age would be roughly about 40, 45 years of the employees. And most of the, it's a branch office, right? It's not a very huge head office kind of a setup, or a divisional office kind of a setup. It was a completely client facing end. So the things that I wanted to bring about was basically client centric kind of operations. And typically the way the public sectors run is a very structured and manner, where they have certain rules, and like a lunchtime, and the productivity levels are actually capped rather than made unlimited, and there was no service orientation. So that's the change we wanted to bring about. And obviously, it was something, when you want to suggest this, and that too on day one, and with hardly knowing each other. I think that's another thing. I mean, you are hardly familiar; they're not familiar with you, and here's this young bloke trying to teach, people of 40 plus, kind of, you know, uh, personal, all this. So, obviously they won't respect you. So the idea is then, that was the first day, and it was a pretty hard lesson in terms of, I would say, man management. I think that's a big lesson. And after that, I'm sure that this was a lesson well learned. And I'll tell you, the big impact that it had was this became one of the best performing branches over a period of 2 years. And when I left, actually, and the same set of people who get out me had actually taken me in a procession to the station to see me off. And that's how, when you start looking at interest, and looking at mutuality of interest, and addressing the concerns one by one, and taking them away, winning them away. So you tend to have a winning team, irrespective of how hostile it starts as. So, and some of them are still in touch with me. So that's the kind of impact you can have. But yeah, I mean, as I said, this is about embracing change, but and bringing in change. But to do that, you need to understand the people sitting on the opposite side of the table as well, and taking their concerns into account, and then trying to forge a common purpose.
Wow, wow. Okay, that's powerful stuff. That's a great start to the whole story. And then you were saying something about joining the George Soros Fund?
Not the George Soros, that's the GIC Asset Management Company, which was
Uh-huh.
formed with joint venture with George Soros's Quantum Fund Management. So
Mm-hmm.
George Soros at that time, was really reckoned as one of the pillars, and still is, of course, of investment. And during that time, he was very popular because he brought the Bank of England to heels, and in fact, he earned a lot of respect because of that. Of course, he made a lot of money in the process, and so getting a central bank to basically to heal by an individual investor is something unheard of. And he did that during that time. And plus, he was a very well respected investor. So, GIC Asset Management Company, actually having a joint venture with the George Soros led Quantum Fund Management, was itself a big thing, big event. And it was a moment of pride for us, actually getting an opportunity to join such a company, and interacting with people from the quantum fund management. So the early days in capital markets was really spent learning from some of these greats that I happened to meet in the course. And that's how the stint in the financial services and capital markets got cemented, and my learning process began.
Wow, wow. But I see that you've done your CFA and then you've also gone on and done your MBA. So what prompted that? And all of this is while you were working, right?
Yeah.
How did that come by?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say all of this was while I was working. I think for the MBA, which was a full-time MBA in the UK, yeah, I had to take a sabbatical. But yeah, I took a sabbatical after almost a decade of working. And I think this is a realization that in financial services, typically it's a knowledge-oriented business, and you need to be at the edge of that. I mean, the cutting edge of that, and be successful. You have to continuously keep developing yourself and keep up to speed with the rapid developments that are happening in the financial services. And really, it's not just regulations, but customer preferences, as well as the radical changes that the technology, as well as the entire span of industry that keeps on bringing about. You need to really keep yourself abreast of things. So that realization prompted me really. I mean, after graduation, even when I was in insurance, I did the associate. I completed the associate of the Federation of Insurance Institutes of India. That was a technical qualification for insurance as well. So I think it's a personal one, but I also feel that in the industry that I was in, you need to continuously keep yourself up to speed. Yeah.
So, so this is remarkable, and the reason I say so is that in India, it's not very common for people to take a sabbatical, right? It's most of us who complete our education and then get into work, and then whatever ongoing development takes place is something that the employer does. And it's and right now the trend is catching on where people also do online courses, but you've done this way back 15 years or 20 years ago, and you took a sabbatical and you said, I'm going to go do my MBA. That must have been pretty bold for those times, right?
Yeah, I think it's very rare, and the at least my generation, I think, are led to believe, or the way they were brought about is that the once you are in the job, you are completely in the job. But maybe you might be changing roles or even companies, but you are in the job from the start to till your age of retirement, and these things are not really well looked upon, and people would wonder why would you want to leave a successful job and try and work again. I think that's the principle. The other one is, typically we are oriented towards completing our education completely, including post graduation or doctorate or whatever, and then getting into the job and then being in the job straight away. But things are changing, and I think that's for good. One is, of course, technology is bringing in the changes that you mentioned about online courses and continuous learning. And apart from that, I think from a personal side, I believe that it's not all about slogging in the office and trying to save money. There is a lot of richness beyond wealth. I mean, financial wealth as well. I think that realization meant that I need live my life in a more fulfilling and complete manner, and not just look about chasing money. I think that's another early realization, I would say, which led me to take the decisions that I did, and I don't regret it at all.
So is that one of the reasons why you decided to turn entrepreneur?
Yeah, so it came about because see, by then, if you look at it, I was almost 40 years in my age, and 2 decades of experience in financial services. And I was working with a bank, you'd be familiar, ABN AMRO Bank, and it was doing pretty well in India and globally as well. But during the height of the stock market boom in 2007, ABN AMRO Bank was acquired by three, other banks. One was, of course, RBS, the Royal Bank of Scotland. The other two were Banco Santander, and the other one was the French one, Bank BNP. So the our part of the bank was acquired by Royal Bank of Scotland, and post 2007, when the market meltdown happened due to the global financial crisis, the RBS itself went under and was bailed out by the government of UK, and most of its global operations were getting rolled down, or some of them were just getting downsized. In India, I think RBS had plans to sell their consumer business to banks. It didn't materialize, partly due to regulatory reasons and partly due to other reasons. And at that point in time, I felt that I need to do something else rather than join another bank and do the same functions. And that's how I think the idea germinated to become an entrepreneur and start Trust Plutus. I think that's how it.
So you turned an entrepreneur at during the times of the, the in 2008, when most people would actually be running to shelter. You decided to take the big leap and start off at that point in time. So tell us about what you started and how did you go about putting your team together, your co-founder, and what was it all about?
So the best businesses, as you would have read in the books, happen when there is a deep downturn. I mean, because when the economic bounces back, your businesses also start doing well. And I think in the downturn, the planning becomes much more rigorous, and also your attention to costs and efficiencies are much higher. Whereas in a bull market, if you set up a business, money is available cheaply, then there's a lot of slack that comes in, and there's a lot of overconfidence in the model. So I think it's not a bad idea to set up in a downturn. But really, I mean, the crux is that, do you have a right kind of a partner when you set it up? And do you have the right kind of a model and the right kind of a team which is aligned to that model? I think as long as you have all these pieces together, it's a great time to really set up a business.
So how did you go about it? Who was your co-founder, if you can name them, and and about your team, right? And I have a question on that, but I'll park it right now. So maybe you can just continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, since your question largely relates to the investor, the best thing about getting a right kind of an investor is when your client refers somebody. I mean, because the client knows you and he knows the kind of service that we give. I think that's the kind of reference that can be, a great one. So, thankfully, I think, I didn't really have to struggle much because there was a client who referred me to an investor saying, look, they are interested in investing into a wealth management company and partnering. So that's how it happened. And, when I realized, of course, at that point in time, I didn't realize who that partner was. But when I got introduced, he happened to be the senior partner for Rare Enterprises, which is one of the successful family offices in India, and investing into public markets. And this senior partner himself had a very large fixed income dedicated business called Trust Financial. So in that sense, I think it was a great partnership and did really well till the time it lasted. Yes.
Nice. And you had an unusual name for your company, your wealth management firm, Trust Plutus, right? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty interesting story. But when we started it, many people thought that this is another MNC company coming into India, and they wanted to know about it. So, the conversation was really interesting because first, as we had to tell the clients who we were meeting, um, that it's not an MNC company, it's an Indian company, and the name, name was of course fairly easy. Why it was what it is when I tell you the reasons. Trust is basically the uh, central pillar around which a client advisory relationship works. And we were in the financial advisory business. So, trust came in naturally as to the name. And another reason is that, as I said, the fixed income company that Utpal, who co-founded this company, happened to you know uh, have a name called Trust Financials. So that's how where we took the name from. And then of course Plutus. Plutus is in Greek mythology you would be knowing that it stands for god of wealth, and that's how Trust Plutus happened. And so that's it. I mean, that's a very simple once you know the reason. But yeah, I mean, the name sounds pretty exotic to begin with. Yeah.
No, I think there's a lot of purpose behind it, and I think I'm amazed to hear how the whole thing came by because it really looks like there was a plan. There was a lot of thought into naming the company, and you mentioned that at the core of any investing or financial advisory is trust, right? What was the purpose behind Trust Plutus?
Yeah. So as you know, this was a child of the GFC. That's the global financial crisis. It was born in the cradle of that crisis, and you yourself said that you started in a business right at when there was an economic crisis. And if you look at the crisis happened largely, and that's a global thing, is because of misallocation of resources. And why does misallocation of resources happen? Because of lack of understanding of risk, and also in a sense that the incentives, the wrong kind of incentives, lead to wrong kind of decisions and allocations. So what we felt, and we also felt that in a wealth management business, there is a lot of conflict because most of the wealth management businesses were run by commercial banks or investment banks or brokerage houses who had that conflict in terms of feeding these clients into their own main line of business. So we felt a dedicated wealth management business would mean that they would be removed or far from these kind of conflicts. And the other reason is typically we felt that the industry in India was at a very nascent stage, and it required people who were focused and experienced and well qualified, with respect to this particular field. And we didn't have too many people skilled in this particular field. And that's also one of the reasons why when we beefed up our team, we also trained them well enough to earn certifications of CFP, that's Certified Financial Planner, or a CFA, that's Chartered Financial Analyst. Both are global qualifications and very well respected in the investment advisory field. And many of our team members took it up to demonstrate their commitment to this industry.
That's commendable. That's truly commendable. So, for a startup with such a clear idea of how you'd like to position it, what your philosophy on risk was, how you wanted to focus on educating your salespeople, really, and insisting that there is certification that goes along with their training. I think that goes a long way. Where are you on that journey right now? You've made an exit, or can you give us some highs on some of the interesting stories that you can share with us?
Yeah, so in 2019, that's last year, I exited the company. I set up the Trust Plutus. Now, it's happened because in the journey, while the journey entirely is pretty memorable and great. So there comes a time, where you come to a fork, and where the partners have to part. The reason is very simple. When we started out the Trust Plutus, we felt that it has to be a boutique and a niche company dedicated to basically give fiduciary advice to the clients, and which should be as far as possible free from conflict. So, but as you grow up in scale, and there is bound to be distortions in the model, and I felt that I'm not ready to take up a model which would scale up, but at the same time there would be distortion in the model. It was I realized that if you want to scale up further, then you will end up and fast, you'll end up distorting the model. So, but then the ambitions of an investor is always that to scale up, and I think that's the point when.
Wow. Okay, so some of the things that you mentioned, right, which is about prudence in terms of investing and the risk management, they seem to be very relevant for what happened in India in 2019 again, right? You saw some of the large financial institutions go belly up. Do you have something to say over there? Because it's been a while, and one would think that these kind of lessons would have been learned by investment managers by now, and they wouldn't be taking those kind of risks. But that's exactly what happened all over again.
Yeah, so as there's a great saying by a renowned historian, Toynbee, if you remember, it says that those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. And these economic cycles that we keep passing through every now and then reminds us that there are people who still forget some of these lessons, and that's why these things keep on occurring. And at the same time, I know one should also understand that there's a certain level of creative destruction that takes place in a capitalist structure. While India is not a perfect capitalist structure. In fact, no economy in the world today is. But yeah, I mean, in a sense that some of these destructions are welcome because it takes away the weaker institutions and allows the stronger institutions to get stronger. But having said that, I think some of the things that occurred, I think, could have been completely avoidable, and we could have gone through with less of a crisis than what we are going through today. And it's largely because of reckless incentives that actually spoil the system. And as I said, and even Charlie Munger, the partner of Warren Buffett, talks about the power of incentives and how it distorts behavior, and much of the mistakes that we commit are on account of these perverse incentives.
So can you elaborate a little bit about the performance and the reward equation that happens in the financial markets?
It's let me just give an illustration. If you look at the incentives for how do investment bankers reward their people, right? It's very simple. They have to crack a deal, and the larger the deal, the bigger the size of the fee, and then when the investment banker strikes a deal and the deal happens and the trade goes on successfully, then the investment banker, who's the relationship manager, gets a huge payoff, right? In terms of bonuses and all that. Now let's look at the other side that happens, the flip side, that after a deal, something happens, and the over a period of time, the companies which are merged or together don't get along well, and but here is an investment banker who's done the deal and taken out the bonuses. But here are two companies merged together, but they're not successful. Even after 4 to 5 years, there's some problems in terms of the culture, or even the product mix, or even the markets that they operate in, that they can't run successfully. And instead of actually 2 and 2 becoming 40, that's the objective. They don't even become 2 plus 2 4. Rather, they become 2 minus 2 0 over a period of time. But then nobody penalizes the original deal maker, right? So there is a power play here where a short-termism and transaction orientation takes precedence over the longer term nature. But the companies who merged, paid a much higher price, but by then the investment bankers have gone scot-free. So that's one part. The second part is in terms of now look at a relationship manager in a bank, and he is being given targets on a monthly basis to sell investment products, and typically equity products, which are pretty risky, and where the market is volatile, it can go up and down. and you offer it to a client to just meet your targets for that month. And here is somebody who is saddled with a portfolio which might not even perform even after a decade. So how about that for a perverse incentive? So you get measured within a month of doing that transaction, whereas the client is saddled with a portfolio which is at a loss for some cases even for a decade, or you may not even make money for a long period of time.
So do you think this will ever change?
Yeah, I mean, see, the point about it is, regulators are aware of it. So increasingly they keep beefing. And if you look at post 2008, investment banking and consumer banking got separated in many of the banks, and the level of incentives have fallen for investment bankers. And in India, the kind of fees that are earned by distributors when selling financial products have been capped now, and also increasingly longer term aspects are being looked at while trying to devise a reward mechanism. But yeah, things are far from perfect at this point in time. They're still on a developing stage, I would say.
There is so much talk about behavioral finance, and it is relatively new as a subject, correct? Have you encountered that in in your investment philosophy? Have you seen that actually play out? How does that, can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about that?
So I think much of the behavior finance is all about keeping your egos, emotions, and expectations in control, right? So it's all about that. I mean, let me give you an example. I mean, if you are a very egoistic person and you feel that you know it all and you know everything, and you are handling a portfolio and you feel that a certain stock will do well, and you are over optimistic and you don't rely on others, and the stock goes bad, and it jolts you very very badly in your portfolio. So there is another way in which when a particular portfolio doesn't perform well, and you run into a loss, you become loss averse. So this is another of the other extreme of the behavioral experience that you encounter. Then there is one thing, you encounter a couple of friends in your in a social circle, and they keep recommending that their advisor had recommended some stock that's bound to go up, and you, without doing any due diligence, actually start buying that stock just because a couple of your friends recommended, and that's kind of a social proofing or a herd mentality that you get into. So the entire role of an advisor, I think, is in terms of keeping all these three egos, emotions, and expectations in check, and be a dispassionate consultant or a coach or a mentor to a client for his portfolio, and see that there is no reckless behavior or overly conservative behavior that is destroying one's wealth. So I think that's a big role, and I think it's all about tailoring behavior to take advantage of these opportunities that would happen in the market, because the rest of the market would keep on making these mistakes, right? So if you are having a right advisor, you would be able to identify these misaligned opportunities and take advantage of this.
In your experience, would you say that more of the relationship managers are tending towards this? Are we at 5% of this? Are we 20%? What is your estimate?
Yeah. So, the good part is that, people are cognizant of the fact that behavior plays a very big role in terms of, safeguarding one's portfolio, and one is aware. So there are enough training material that is available now. And if you look at, I think there's a lot of emphasis even at the Nobel Prize level in terms of the behavioral finance, and it's now recognized as a science now. And a lot of awards have gone in, as you know, to behavioral economists now. So I think, and also the fact that the um, uh, the earlier model of portfolio construction hasn't really worked well practically. Meant that a marketplace is hardly perfect, and there is no rational man, and individuals that from time to time deviate from rationality and take decisions. So recognizing these facts is happening, but at the same time, as you know, that even with these, we tend to behave, and much of the behavior is a chemical process, as you know, in our body, and so irrespective of the fact, we tend to be swayed by emotions, and a large part of the population still commits the same mistakes. So I think there is a recognition that behavioral finance should occupy a place in portfolio advisory and investment advice. But at the same time, we are still at a fairly early stage in this process.
Okay, so what's next in the
Yeah,
playbook for you?
I think life is pretty interesting the way it is, and let's see. I mean, I'm currently on a 2-year non-compete contract, so it's still early days for me to really think about what the future holds. But I think we are at a fairly exciting stage with the COVID and the understanding the implications of COVID for people, balancing their work and home. And I see the very important trends emerging out of it, and some I would like to mention here. One is that I think we have always focused on increased urbanization and mass infrastructure, mass-led infrastructure, including mass-led transportation, etc. So, but the COVID is actually telling us that it's better to go back to smaller locations and have much more bespoke kind of transportation arrangements. It's much safer, and at the same time, what it is going it's also saying is that that rapid globalization that we had seen in the past decade means that the world is a stage, and each one plays as per their competencies. But what again it tells us is that increasingly people would have to be more and more self-reliant, and we've also seen that people have leveraged on technology and used some bits of scaling up at any cost as the most effective answer. But when you are looking at post-COVID implications, this may not be the ideal way to set up your business or your model. I think there are these are early days, but what we are seeing is that much of what we have done in the past may be maybe in for a change fairly radically as we go ahead, and we recognize the tail risk of pandemics. And as we know, I think one should read uh, Nassim Taleb's book both Black Swan as well as Anti-Fragility to understand the implications of the tail risk, as well as preparing oneself for withstanding some of these extreme shocks.
So that's very interesting. What so you're saying essentially that a certain amount of self-reliance or sustainability is important, and you're also saying that you need to localize, you need to decongest some of these larger sort of dependencies, right? That you have on a global supply chain or something like that, and then you have some portion of your portfolio which is highly local as well. So whether that's in people, whether it's in your goods, whether it's your supply chain, whether it's your product or whatever, or even if it's your investing, um, it applies everywhere.